Welcome to the European Youth Media Days 2016 in Strasbourg. My name is Olivia Drost.
And my name is Maciej Deja. We are here together with hundreds of young media makers to experience 3 days of media workshops, political discussions, media production, and various insights into international media environment.
We are reporting from the European Youth event, which brings together in Strasbourg thousands of motivated and hard-working youngsters.
7,000 young people, 28 countries. 2 days of workshops, discussions and networking. The event was officially opened by representatives of the European Parliament and the European Youth Forum.
The main topic raised was linked with the difficult times Europe is currently facing. Check out more in the following report.
The future of the European Union started off with beautiful weather. Several hundred people had gathered to take part in the opening ceremony, which served as a reminder that it was up to the young generation to shape the Europe of today.
At present, Europe finds itself at a crucial crossroads, facing bigger challenges than ever, such as the refugee crisis, an increasing nationalism, a long-lasting economic crisis, a possible exit of the UK from the EU, and the terrorism threats.
We're different. We come from all over Europe, from different cultures, from different religions, from different youth organizations, maybe not from a youth organization at all. We're coming from different political backgrounds. But in these times, when there's so many people, politicians and movements that want us to divide, want us to feel fear, want us to stand divided against each other, we come here, and at the Eye, we stand together. That is the essence of why we are here these 2 days.
Afterwards, representatives of several countries and organizations gathered in the hemicycle to kick off the first session of the Eye in discussing how the European Union should develop in the future.
Et c'est vrai que les citoyens européens, parmi eux en particulier les jeunes, pensent qu'elle ne protège plus suffisamment, elle ne les protège plus suffisamment, qu'elle n'est plus exactement l'espace de démocratie rêvé qu'elle devrait être.
Is Europe, once the most important player on the world stage, now a sad reflection of its glory days? Are the cracks in the Union so big that there is no time to worry about the rest of the world?
Should Europe be more vocal in issues regarding human rights? These issues are reflected in the following report.
Human rights matter to young people in Europe. 3 Sakharov Award winners, Saudi human rights activist Ensaf Haidar, Congolese gynecologist Denis Mukwege, and Russian lawyer Kirill Korotev are the people who raise their voices for those who have none. The discussion that took place here in the Parliament raises an important question. What role is Europe playing in endorsing human rights around the world? Dr. Denis Mukwege points out that Europe cannot close itself off from the rest of the world.
L'Europe aujourd'hui, c'est la première finalement puissance économique. L'Europe collabore avec les autres sur le plan économique. Ça serait inconcevable que l'Europe puisse se refermer sur elle-même, puisqu'aujourd'hui nous sommes dans la globalisation. On ne peut pas avoir une globalisation économique sans que les droits humains soient universels.
Lawyer Kirill Korotev knows what happens when democracy is threatened. His human rights organization Memorial is facing a continuous resistance from the Russian authorities. He's calling on Europe to be more supportive.
More support is needed not for me, myself, and not for my organization, but for the values we, I believe, share in common, which are freedom, which are democracy, human rights. And as long as Europe defends strongly its values, it serves Europe the best.
But what happens if the voice for peace and freedom can't even get along among themselves? The cracks among 28 member states are growing, as the refugee crisis showed.
There is no common ground on how to distribute refugees all over this continent. We have some countries that take quite a lot of refugees, Austria, Germany, Sweden, others a bit, and some nothing. This is not a thing of solidarity. We need more solidarity. That's one where we should be united.
The young generation of Europeans has a clear idea what they expect Europe to do.
Well, I think Europe should play a more active role because we have a responsibility. We're one of the biggest trading blocs in the world, so we do have a responsibility to act and to respond when people are in need.
I see Europe as a global player, so I think it's also the responsibility of Europe to take care about certain issues like the so-called refugee crisis.
But the voice of the European Union still carries some weight, says Denis Mukwege.
Juste après le prix Sakharov, j'ai été confronté à beaucoup de problèmes par rapport à mon gouvernement et je crois que ni n'était la réaction des parlementaires européens, spécialement le président Schulz et certains parlementaires, je crois que je ne serais plus capable de continuer à faire mon travail. Ceci, ça confirme que le rôle de l'Europe doit aller au-delà des frontières européennes.
Help is needed now more than ever. Europe can't ignore world's problems. But will Europe react and become a promoter of human rights, freedom of speech and solidarity? It seems like young Europeans want that. For sure, Europe alone cannot change the world for the better, but it can give its support to those who are making small changes every day.
We had the pleasure to host in our studio Mr. Rainer Wieland, Vice President of the European Parliament from Germany. The motto of this year European Youth Media Days is "Together we can make a change." What kind of change does the European Union need, and what we as young people, how we as young people could influence this type of changes?
We want to give an impulse to a lot of people that they spin off, that they are lighthouses. These 7,000 young people, after tomorrow, they are lighthouses in their country talking about Europe. And the other one is the Europeans together in terms of nationality. And I mean, we are somehow at a crossroads because the national states have done too less. We looked into the other directions when the Italians shouted for help and when the Hungarians and the Maltese shouted for help. For 10 years we looked into the other direction. Now we are very surprised. But it's the crisis of the national state. And also the economical crisis, which is in fact a state debt crisis, is also a crisis of the national states. And we have to overcome that. We have to act together because if you look, I mean, our continent is so small. We are the second smallest continent. And 500 million people is around 7% of the world population. 100 years ago, we were 20% of world population. And we cannot believe that we just take our continent and move it away. And the world is continuing turning. And the question is not whether we talk about G7 or G8 or G20, the blank question is, do we talk about G2 or G3? To tell it more brutal, it is the question whether we sit at the table or whether we are only put on the menu. So we have to take care. Politics is not only an obligation to bring to you by politics, it's also a question of getting it, to pull, because things you are interested in, you inform yourself. If you're not really interested in politics, we can do what we want, and you will not take note of it. So we have to speak with our young people that it is your continent, that you are a privileged society. You have to, I said this morning also, as the first generation, since historians can look back, The first generation, you have the chance to start a century like the last one ends. And you have the chance not to have to begin it like the last one began. And this is a precious thing, and everybody should take care for it.
Okay, so we're holding our thumbs to act together. Thank you very much for being here with us.
One of the greatest challenges that Europe is facing nowadays is the migrant crisis. Although the number of people arriving to Greek islands dropped from up to 4,000 to 60 per day, the number is still vital.
Still, there is no legal way for refugees to enter the European Union.
According to the UN, more than 250,000 Syrians have lost their lives in almost 5 years of armed conflict. The war turned into one of the biggest humanitarian and refugee crises of our time. Many people tried to flee and get to Europe. Nur Mahla is one of them.
I left from Aleppo 2012. I went to Turkey, and after a few months I applied for scholarship. It was from the Portuguese, and I have been accepted in that scholarship, and I moved to Portugal.
The conflict in Syria continues to be by far the biggest driver of migration, but ongoing violence in Afghanistan and Iraq, abuses in Eritrea, as well as poverty in Kosovo are also leading people to look for new lives elsewhere. Speaking at this weekend's European Youth event, Shaha Abdahi talked about how the crisis is not restricted to one single region.
Since I was a little girl, I started asking myself in the refugee camps whether that plenty of desert, that desert with almost no water to drink, was it really home, was it really my country?
The young human rights defender was born as a refugee, lived in exile with a stateless travel document. Like many others, she came to Europe with the hope to live a better life. The continuing relationship refugees like Abdahi have with possessing a passport or not is something players of the video game Papers, Please can experience by playing the role of an immigration inspector at the border checkpoint and decide who is to be let in. In real life, there is still no legal way for refugees to enter Europe. Legal immigration opportunities are necessary, says Austrian EP Vice President Ulrike Lunacek at the European Youth event.
Legal immigration opportunities have to happen if we want to save lives and don't want to create chaotic circumstances for refugees.
Lunacek criticizes the lack of solidarity in Europe and countries like her own, Austria, for trying to rebuild borders in order to prevent an uncontrollable influx instead of working on finding a common European solution.
I think it is presented as a solution because it answers questions of domestic policies inside member states very well. It is a way to respond to the opinion that the public hears from certain political leaders.
Listen, to be honest with you, there is no magical solution now for this crisis. The only solution, because all the other solutions are temporary, the only solution is stopping the war. Because people will stop coming. I know my people.
Immigration appears to be a topic that will remain on the European political agenda for years to come. However, while politicians continue to argue, more refugees and migrants continue to make the treacherous journey.
Despite the fact that migrant crisis divides Europeans, there are people for whom borders seem to not exist.
Our next interviewee is Benjamin Bodson, teaching and research assistant in European Law at Catholic University of Louvain.
Our guest is Benjamin Bodson. Welcome.
Thank you.
He's Belgian, studied in Sweden and UK, and will soon marry an Austrian in France, so he's very European. Benjamin, did you feel the EU while studying in the UK?
Well, when I was studying in the UK, it was always funny to hear people saying, you in Europe, and say, well, guys, you are in Europe as well here. But what I could see, although I arrived in the UK with this cliche that all the British were against the EU, I could see that actually no, the Brits do question the EU, do invest the EU, do do maybe try to find other ways that the EU should follow than the ones that it follows for the moment. So from British people, you could actually get very, very good reasoning and very good ideas for a better Europe. This is one of my fears, that if we lose the UK, we lose this kind of big laboratory of ideas that the UK is, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about Brexit, and it's most, I guess, the one of topic is most discussed right now in Europe. Do you think that what would Europe lose if Brexit happened?
So I think more to tell, because I could tell you a lot about this, what both parts would lose. But what I think Europe would lose is somehow the credibility, because if one state leaves the EU, then it's, for me, the door is open for other states to go. We see all these people who want referendums in other member states. We have heard about Nexit, this guy Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, who wanted to organize a referendum as well about the membership of the Netherlands. I think it would be a very bad message to show. Although we thought since the World War II that European integration would go always to more integration, this would be actually the start of disintegration, and maybe not the best way that we should follow for the moment, which is we should be united.
Talking about changes, the motto of the European Youth Media Days is together we can make a change. What kind of change does the European Union need, and how can young people influence this type of changes?
I really think that the EU needs a complete change of narrative, because what the EU is telling today is an EU that doesn't speak to young people anymore. Young people take the EU for granted, which is a mistake, I think, because we see today that war could happen anywhere, even in Europe. But what young people should do is try to reinvest, like engage in the EU and give the EU the sense they want the EU to have. The people who are dealing with all the communication of the EU are people who do not know necessarily how the youth likes to communicate. What kind of channels do they use? Obviously they do research about it, they are very interested to know about it, but I think still the message doesn't reach the people, it doesn't reach the young people. So in this, I think this should be completely rethought in a way that young people would feel more interested to engage. I think if we have young candidates that try to bring the entourage and all the youth together on problems that concern the youth specifically, then we could maybe change the representativity of the population that is in this room.
Thank you very much for your
Thanks to you
being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
We thank Benjamin for his interesting opinion about Brexit. It's almost a month to the referendum in which British people will decide whether they want to stay in the European Union or not.
Anti-European parties claim it will liberate Great Britain from repressing European laws. But during the European Youth event there are no British Eurosceptics to be found. What will Britain and Europe miss out when they file for divorce?
In the European Parliament there are currently 73 seats reserved for British parliamentarians. But if Britain votes to leave the European at its Brexit referendum, those seats will be lost. What else will Britain and Europe lose with the Brexit?
Some estimates say 3 to 4 million British jobs could be lost, and British people could lose the right to freely travel to other European countries. But does that weigh up to the benefit of full independence from European rules? That's what young Brits came to discuss during the European Youth event in Strasbourg.
I kind of think of it as if Britain is in a relationship with the European Union. It'd be like breaking up with the best boyfriend they'd ever have, basically. And it's kind of like where you're trying to pretend that you haven't been influenced by the relationship and that you're still the same person that you were before. Whereas I think we do have a real European identity, and I think if we left the EU, then we'd lose some of that identity. Yeah.
Right. So you don't think Britain would be a good single?
No.
I think, like from what I've understood, is that the migrants they would have stricter control over migrants because we wouldn't have to take in a quota from the EU. So then more migrants would leave the country, and then as a consequence, then say British workers would be able to gain their jobs back. But I think it's just best if we stay. It'll complicate things, you know, like all these treaties will have to change, and it's just too complicated. I think just stay in.
What do you think Great Britain will lose if they leave the European Union?
Great Britain will lose a family. I think the most important thing about the EU is that it's a family of collective nations with a shared identity working together to make this whole continent a better place. And we don't want to get left behind from that. If we want things to happen, if we want social change, we need to do it together.
Now, it's clear how the young Brits think about it, but will the rest of Europe miss Britain?
Do you think there's a Europe without Great Britain?
I don't know really. I think no, because Britain was one of the first countries to join the European Union.
So you would miss what Great Britain culture adds to Europe?
Yes, absolutely, because it has a really great culture and it's really important too. So we all know in Hungary, we all know about the culture of Great Britain.
Their behavior is like it's like a little kid that wants attention, you know. They got the feeling that they should be the special one because of their great history, always the center of the empire, and now when you have to be equal with 28 states that are, you consider them inferior than you need your attention, so let's go to a referendum, yes we are great, yes we are Britain, and I don't know.
There are clearly consequences if Britain leaves the European Union. But whether the Union Jack will still wave in front of the Parliament in the future remains to be seen.
In 2014, European Parliament used sanctions as a foreign policy tool and imposed it on Russia due to its annexion of Crimea and involvement in eastern Ukraine.
2 years later, there is a debate. Are economic sanctions effective, and what was their impact?
I'm standing right now in one of the highest political and decision-making bodies of the European Union, European Parliament. Right now, behind this door, there is debate going on regarding economic and political sanctions imposed by European Union on Russia. So let's go inside and take a look what's going on.
It's never about Council of Europe, where Russia is actually a member. We could get more opportunities to communicate with Russia.
We should try the diplomatic trade system between EU and Russia.
I'm here with Christian, who is participant of this discussion, and I would ask him his opinion about economic sanctions imposed by Russia. So what do you think? Do they actually work or not?
It's a good question. The European Union does not have a hard power, only soft power, which is represented through economic sanctions that the European Union is imposing on Russia. Are they efficient or not? So that's the real question.
Do you think that they affect more the citizens, the poor citizens of Russia, or Putin regime?
So they definitely affect both.
A description of a war in the east of Ukraine. There was no words about culture, no words about Russia, no words about...
This is the exact place in which in 2014 elected representatives of this political body decided to incriminate Russia's actions in Ukraine.
So I think that economic sanctions do have a role, a very important role, but they do have way more power than you would think about in the first place, because lots of poor people often, of course, pay the hard price, and of course that puts pressure on the political system in Russia, which would eventually hope to change.
We have to give Russia something instead of sanction Russia, so to make them give us something in return.
It's more likely to affect the poor people than the rich people, unfortunately. They will be bearing the brunt of it. However, in the long term, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the people higher up to do something about it, so it will affect them in the long term.
After 2 years of sanctions imposed on and by Russia after annexation of Crimea and intervening in eastern Ukraine. It's very debatable. Do the economic sanctions actually work or not? That was the main topic in today's discussion, organized by European Youth Parliament of Finland.
The EYE is not only about serious topics. There is a lighter side taking place outside the European Parliament, parallel with the discussions.
That's the Youth Festival. Find out more in our next report.
Youth activism extends beyond the walls of the European Parliament. Here at the Youth Festival, participants are able to express themselves in different and artistic ways. Dozens of messages represent the wishes and desires of young Europeans for the future. But sometimes a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. Activists see these creative workshops as an opportunity to raise awareness for the causes they care about.
I'm here with lots of Roma and non-Roma young people from all over Europe to raise our voice for Roma people, because Roma people are very much discriminated in many countries. We have lots of walls, lots of barriers, lots of ghettos, lots of segregation, lots of discrimination, and we want to raise awareness among all these 7,000 young people today here in Strasbourg about this. The issue that is on the top of our agenda is, I would say, fighting hate speech, first of all. We just met our partners from the No Hate Speech movement here, so this is also a good place to connect and to work together for the issues we have. With refugees, so I would say we have a common cause. We have one fight, and this fight is for human rights. This fight is for equality. No matter what we are, where we are from, we fight for equality.
The fight can be physical too, and participants can experience themselves what it takes to break down the barriers.
No more wars in Europe.
That was all from us.
Thank you for watching the presentation of the TV News workshop of the European Youth Media Days 2016.
Till next time.